Which of these numbers are equal to 2.05? A, 41/20ths, B, 2 50/100ths, C, 25/100ths, and D, 2.050. We need to look at each one of these possibilities separately. So we're going to begin by just looking at A here, 41/20ths. Now, for A, 41/20ths, if we're trying to decide if it's equal to a decimal, 2.05, we need to write both numbers either as decimals or as fractions. We could go either way, but I think here I prefer to write both as a decimal. Now we already have a decimal, 2.05, so I'll convert 41/20ths to decimal form. Any fraction can be converted to decimal form by writing it as a division problem. We're going to do decimal long division here, where I take the number on top, 41, and divide by the number below, 20. Now, 20 goes into 41 two times. 2 times 20 is 40. Subtract, I get 1. And now, because I want to get a decimal result, I'm going to write a decimal point to the right of the ones place inside the long division box. And I also write a decimal point right up above in my answer. Then I can add a 0 on the inside, and I can bring that 0 down and continue the long division process. Now, does 20 go into 10? Well, 20 goes into 10 0 times. So I write a 0 up above, just to the right of the decimal point now. 0 times 20 is 0. I subtract, 10 minus 0 is 10. Then I can add another 0 on the end, and I bring down that new 0. And now I ask myself, how many times does 20 go into 100? And 20 does go into 100. In fact, it goes 5 times. 5 times 20 is 100. Subtract, 100 minus 100 is 0. And because we got 0, we can stop the long division process now. So my decimal form for 41/20ths is 2.05. That's exactly the same as this decimal. So yes, 41/20ths is equal to the decimal 2.05. Now let's take a look at the second number in our list here, 2 50/100ths. Again, we got to decide if we want to write this in fraction form or decimal form, both numbers one way or the other. 2.05 is already decimal. I think it's easiest here to convert 2 50/100ths to decimal form. Let's go ahead and do that. Now 2 50/100ths is a mixed numeral. 2 is the whole number part, and 50/100ths is the fraction part. The fraction part is less than 1 whole, so we know in decimal form the fraction part will only contribute to the decimal to the right of the decimal point. The 2 will go in front of the decimal point. That 2 whole is like 2 ones. So we have 2 point. Now the 50/100ths. Because the denominator of that fraction is 100, I can convert directly to decimal form. Decimals are a shorthand for fractions that have denominators like 10 or 100 or 1,000. Now the denominator is 100. That tells me that I want to think about the tenths and hundredths place just to the right of the decimal point. The numerator is 50. I know the ones place of the 50, the 0 on the 50, goes in the 100ths place of the decimal. So the 0 on the 50 goes here in the hundredths place, and the 5 goes just to the left to it. The 5 ends up in the tenths place of that decimal. 2 and 50/100ths is 2.50 when it's written as a decimal. Now, 2.50 is not the same as 2.05. This decimal has a 5 in the tenths place, but this decimal has a 5 in the 100ths place. So we know 2 and 50/100ths is not equal to 2.05. Now let's take a look at the third number here, C, 25/100ths. Now there's an easy way here to tell whether 25/100ths is equal to 2.05 or not. In fact, it can't be. 25/100ths is a fraction that's less than 1 whole. The number on top is smaller than the number below, so it has to be less than 1 whole. 2.05 has whole number part 2. That's more than 1 whole. In fact, it's more than 2 whole. So just from that much analysis, we know there's no way 25/100ths could be equal to 2.05. Now, if you like, you could convert 25/100ths to decimal form, just like we did in B. We really don't have to do that, but it's certainly okay to do it. It's a fraction less than 1 whole, so in decimal form, it will be 0 point something. Because my denominator is 100, I'll mark the tenths in the hundredths place. Up above, I have 25. The ones place up above, the 5 up above, will go in the hundredths place of the decimal. So the 5 goes right here in the hundredths place of the decimal, and the 2 goes right in front of it. 0.25, or just 0.25 if you like, is the decimal form for 25/100ths. And again, there's no way this is equal to 2.05. 0 whole number part here, 2 whole number part there. They're definitely not equal. So we have one more number to look at here, D, 2.050. And the good news is it's a decimal. Our original number was a decimal. We have both written in decimal form. Let's take a look at D, 2.050. Now, sometimes zeros are necessary on a decimal number, and sometimes they're not necessary. When we're beyond the decimal point, to the right of the decimal point, zeros on the end of a decimal are not necessary. They can be dropped off. This 0 in between the 2 point and the 5, though, is absolutely necessary. That affects the value of the decimal. So 2.050 is equal to 2.05. And that's our original decimal up here. So sure enough, D is equal to 2.05. Now just before we quit, let's talk a little bit about why we can cross out that 0 on the end. See, 2.050 stands for the mixed numeral 2 and 50 over tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 51,000ths. 2 and 51,000ths could be reduced. We could write that as 2 and 5 times 10 over 100 times 10. In other words, I could cancel a 10 above and below. That's just like crossing out a 0 above and below on the end of that fraction. Now, I'm not going to reduce it any further here. What I'm going to do is go right back to decimal form. I now have 2 and 5/100ths. The decimal for 2 and 5/100ths is 2 point. Now I can't write down the 5 right away because this 5 needs to go in the 100ths place. Think tenths, hundredths. Here's where the 5 goes. It needs to be in that second place over. So I need to write a 0 in front of that 5 to hold the place. 2.050, when we go to fraction form, back to decimal, is equal to 2.05. Crossing out the 0 on the end of a decimal is the same thing as canceling a 10 above and below in a fraction. It really is the same as reducing a fraction. And now it turns out A and D are equal to 2.05.